Over a 30-year period, from 1914 to 1945, more than 60 million people will die. In the bloodiest conflict the world has ever seen. But it all began in the slums of Vienna. At age 25, Adolf Hitler is a poor loner and aspiring artist, struggling to survive. Both his parents are dead, leaving Hitler truly alone in the world.
He was a lost soul. He wanted to be an artist, but he couldn't get into the art school, and he ended up living in a flop house.
Left without any means of support, his only way to make money is selling paintings around town for next to nothing.
Hitler didn't have a plan B when he was rejected. He just didn't know what to do, so he started to drift. He had very little money. He was living in a hand-to-mouth existence. In a sense, waiting for something to happen.
Before long, a chance event 450 miles away will change everything. The 28th of June, 1914. Franz Ferdinand, the Archduke of Austria, is visiting Sarajevo when he is assassinated. The assassin's aim is to return parts of the Austro-Hungary Empire to Greater Serbia or Yugoslavia. Within a month, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. This triggers a chain reaction as alliances force the major powers to take sides. Emerging from the tangle, the British Empire, the French Republic, and Russia become known as the Allies, while Austria-Hungary, Germany, and the Ottoman Empire form the Central Powers. This will be the first global war. Men on both sides rush to join the fight. Hitler has so far avoided the draft into the Austrian army. Holding anti-Semitic views, he has no desire to fight for his multicultural homeland.
He's a passionate German patriot, trapped in the multi-ethnic, racially diverse Habsburg Empire. As an Austrian, he's a pan-German.
The Austrian army eventually forces Hitler into conscription.
He tried out for the Austrian army. He failed the physical. He wasn't considered strong enough to carry a rifle.
Free from the Austrian draft, Hitler turns to Germany, a nation he views as racially pure. He is accepted into the German army, who are taking almost anyone, as they work to build the largest fighting force the world has ever seen. Germany has finally given Hitler what he's always wanted: a place to belong.
Being part of the German army in the First World War was something that Hitler deeply loved. There was a flood of patriotism, and Hitler was swept away by this.
Zwei! Drei!
Throughout August of 1914, Hitler trains as a private in the German army.
Well, the German army was considered to be the finest army in the world. It was a massive force, well-equipped, well-trained, and very well led. Being part of the German army was something that Hitler loved.
The structure of training transforms Hitler into a devout German soldier. Hitler joins 1.5 million Germans marching towards the French border and the unified Allied forces. In the history of warfare, armies this large have never met in combat.
When you look at World War I, it's about machine guns and, all of these sorts of new killing mechanisms. It's the beginning of the 20th century as a tech era. This is not men on horseback anymore. This is a motorized war.
The advanced weaponry turns the conflict into a slaughter. 230 men are killed each hour. One death every 15 seconds.
They found that if they dug even shallow trenches and used machine guns, a small number of troops could stop a large attacking force.
It was of the utmost importance that the invaders not be allowed to pass. Thus, the trenches appeared and eventually extended all the way to the North Sea. From October-November 1914, we saw a line of trenches across 435 miles from the North Sea to Switzerland.
The trenches cover 25,000 miles. Laid end to end, they would circle the globe.
Very soon after the war began, both sides realized we can entrench and the other side can't move us out. They can move us backwards, but only at horrendous cost. And as a result of this, the war just bogged down in the muds of northern France.
Having moved quickly through neutral Belgium, Germany is now stalled in vicious trench warfare with the Allies in northern France.
In the First World War, the east and the north of France were totally devastated. Not only by the trenches, but by the bombings as well. Dozens of French towns and villages don't exist anymore. They were totally destroyed.
platoon commander in the French army is one of the first to be wounded. He returns to the field, determined to gain an edge over the Central Powers. His name is Charles de Gaulle.
On a personal level, de Gaulle was haughty. He had chosen a military career because he believed in adventure. He believed in a Napoleonic campaign.
The son of aristocratic intellectuals, de Gaulle is a fierce patriot. He first makes a name for himself sneaking across the battlefield and into enemy territory to eavesdrop on the Germans. Mission after mission, de Gaulle returns with information, which earns him a citation for bravery. It proves he's a natural leader with a promising future. In London, another young military man is convinced he can break the stalemate in northern France.
He comes up to the barman and says,
Born into one of the noblest families in Britain, he's risen through the ranks at unusual speed to become the First Lord of the British Admiralty. His name is Winston Churchill.
Churchill had the most enormous self-confidence, and it's easy to see why that was the case. He was the son of Lord Randolph Churchill, who was a brilliant politician. And so Churchill, from a very young man, saw himself, almost by divine right, as playing a leading role in politics.
Churchill forms a bold plan that he's certain will change the Allies' fortunes.
Winston Churchill in 1914 was the boy wonder of British politics. Everybody agreed that he was a genius, including himself. He had one huge advantage. He was the only one in the government who understood war.
what if we could send the fleet to the south, into the Black Sea?
Resupply the Russians?
Well, yes, exactly.
There's no way.
Well, yes, there is. Through Gallipoli.
Gallipoli? No.
This is our way in.
With all due respect, we are here to provide
This
information.
is what we are doing.
A lot of the people Churchill worked with thought he was a man of contradictions, a maverick, a loose cannon. He was known as someone to watch. His friends would say someone to watch because he's very talented, and his enemies would say someone to watch because he's dangerous.
The Gallipoli Peninsula is heavily guarded by the Central Powers. Churchill's plan is to blast through the narrow strait, take Constantinople, and push through to Russia. The Allies can then resupply the Russian troops and strengthen the Eastern Front. If it's successful, the Allies will be able to turn the tide of the war and crush the Central Powers. The Armada includes 100 warships for what will be the largest amphibious invasion the world has ever seen. In London, Churchill waits for news from his attack fleet.
People often ask me, what's the most difficult decision you've ever made? It's always the decision of sending men into battle, and the worst part of it all is the night that the battle begins. Because you know you just launched something, and you know that within a few hours, you will start getting calls from the battlefield, from your commanders out in the field, that will tell you how many young men have died.
Yes? They're halfway up the straits.
They should have broken through by now.
They'll make it.
4 ships sunk. Another burning.
Losses were to be expected.
The fleet is requesting permission to turn back.
They are to press on at all costs. This is war.
To their horror, on the evening of that first day, the generals and the admirals found that instead of this great, almost bloodless, war-winning stroke they dreamed of that was going to end the carnage on the Western Front, the troops were met by a hail of machine gun fire and artillery. The casualties were appalling. Soon the sea ran red with blood.
The losses from Allied countries, including Australia, New Zealand, France, India and Britain, are huge. In total, 56,000 troops are killed, and more than 130,000 are reported wounded or missing.
News of the terrible casualties inflicted a tremendous shock at home, especially in Australia and New Zealand. There'd been nothing like the level of casualties that one saw in 1915 at Gallipoli.
The invasion is a devastating failure. Almost no ground is gained. And the supply route to Russia remains closed off.
Gallipoli was a disaster, and it's hard to overstate the damage that it did to his reputation. I think he was wrong, and he paid a terrible political price, which many people thought was going to be the end of it.
The public is outraged by the carnage. Someone will have to take the blame, and all fingers point to one man.
It's over.
The plan was sound.
Excuse me?
The plan was sound. All we needed to do was keep pushing
I'm afraid
forward.
your services as First Lord of the Admiralty are no longer required. I'll expect your letter of resignation in the morning.
When Churchill was let go, he thought his career was over, finished. And that wasn't melodrama on his part, and he could be melodramatic. It appeared that it would be finished. It's hard to imagine Churchill being humbled by something like Gallipoli, but he was chastened.
Defeated and humiliated, Churchill's career is all but ruined. He's offered a desk job, which he turns down. He knows if he's ever going to redeem himself, he needs a new path. So Churchill does the unthinkable. He enlists in the British Army and heads straight for the front lines. Among the German soldiers stationed in the trenches along the Western Front is Adolf Hitler. Even after months on the front lines, his extreme political views and overt racism makes him an outcast among the men.
Hitler was regarded by the other troops as something of a loner, something of a rather peculiar, eccentric person who kept it to himself.
But what Hitler lacks in popularity, he makes up for in blind ambition.
Command wants this taken to the 3rd Battalion. Now!
Yes, sir. Hitler's role as a messenger was actually considered perhaps the most dangerous task in trench warfare. Running from trench to trench, exposing himself to enemy fire, the mortality rate for messengers was quite significant.
The Germans are retreating. Adolf Hitler's been injured, and he has this encounter with Private Henry Tandy, a British private. Tandy has Adolf Hitler in his sights. And even though he's a trained soldier, he can't bring himself to pull the trigger. If Tandy had pulled the trigger, Adolf Hitler would have died on the battlefields in World War I, and the whole course of human history would have been changed.
With his life spared, Hitler starts to believe he is destined for greatness. "6,000 miles away, America has nothing to do with the war in Europe. They're in their own war, with Pancho Villa, a general in the Mexican Revolution. Villa is carrying out attacks along the southwestern border with America. The US has just thrown its support behind the president of Mexico, Villa's enemy. In retaliation, Villa and his men seize a US mining train. American civilians are killed in the attack, prompting America to take action. Nearly 5,000 American troops cross the Mexican border to take down Villa. But fighting a guerrilla force with a traditional army is next to impossible. One army captain is determined to find a different way. His name is George S. Patton.
Patton's ancestors fought in the Revolutionary War. They fought in the Civil War. He grew up wanting to be a military hero. He has a reputation for being smart, tough, and for being ruthless. And he had another quality that's essential in military leadership. He understands the power of technology, and he doesn't want to fight with cavalry and with horses. He's looking for a new technology that will change the nature of the battlefield. So the car is fairly new. If you strap a gun to a car, you've got a new instrument of warfare.
What Patton doesn't know is that he's about to revolutionize warfare.
I think Patton knew only one direction, and that was forward. He had a lot of charisma. He was a very colorful leader. I thought he was very egotistical. And that's fine as long as you translate that into good leadership, but maybe a little bit over the top.
Almost immediately, Patton is able to put his plan into action. And he launches a surprise raid on Pancho Villa's camp.
Faster! Got him on the run, go! Get down! Go, pick it up!
The bandits are no match for Patton and his innovative mobile tactics. And by the end of the fight, 3 of Villa's men have been killed, including his second in command. The first use of motorized warfare by the United States Army is a huge success. As the spring of 1916 approaches, the battle rages on in Europe. And the death toll on both sides ceaselessly rises.
World War I was one of the worst bloodletting carnage of modern times. The carnage was just, it's beyond comprehension now. I mean, it's impossible to understand why generals would believe that gaining 100 yards is worth expending a few thousand lives.
With the Allies' backs against the wall, Germany attempts to convince Italy to switch sides and join the Central Powers. But Italy rejects the offer and sends tens of thousands of troops into the Italian Alps to fortify its borders in case of attack. Among them is a sharpshooter named Benito Mussolini.
Before the war, Mussolini is an anti-war activist, he's a journalist, he's pretty much a pacifist.
But after 2 years on the front lines, this one-time socialist has become a radical nationalist and is now willing to do anything to defend his homeland. The time spent defending Italy's border makes Mussolini hungry to return Italy to greatness.
Mussolini becomes a very different person than he was before the war. His whole attitude toward his nation and his role in it changes. He develops this hyper sense of nationalism, this real pride in his country.
The horrors of war have transformed Mussolini into a skilled killer. A trait he'll take back with him to Rome. 6,000 miles from the Western Front. One country is looking to use the war in Europe to its advantage. For the past 50 years, Japan has pushed to modernize its ancient culture and gain respect on the global stage. The country spends the vast majority of its resources bulking up its military, transforming the samurai tradition into a modern army that is about to be put to the ultimate test. Japanese leaders see the war in Europe as a perfect opportunity to take their place on the world stage. Japan joins the Allied forces and declares war on Germany. It then invades and occupies German-controlled territories in the Pacific, securing important trade routes for Great Britain and France. While Japan expands its empire, an elite group of warriors is created to join the fighting. Among them is a young recruit, the descendant of a samurai. His name is Hideki Tojo.
Tojo was a very serious, ambitious, hard-working man, and he was expected to pursue his career in military service, and he himself was very ambitious to achieve something in his profession. In many ways, I think his future was very promising from the very beginning.
For months, Tojo will endure one of the most brutal and physically demanding training regimens in the world.
You are all weak, unworthy to serve the Emperor. You are the one they call the Razor.
The experience hardens Tojo for battle and solidifies his unflinching loyalty to the Emperor. As Japan flexes its military might, in Belgium, the British Army digs in, fighting to stay alive. Since the beginning of the war, nearly 400,000 British soldiers have been killed, just to be replaced by new arrivals. Among the new recruits is a man battling back from the biggest failure of his life. Battalion Commander Winston Churchill.
Churchill took responsibility for everything he ever did in his life. He never passed the buck. He was humbled, humiliated by Gallipoli, and he had to do something. And he put himself in harm's way and volunteered to go to the trenches. It was a very dangerous thing to do.
Sir, 2nd platoon lost this main trench.
Get me the multitude from the West Reserve now!
For Churchill, the experience is humbling.
You get the hell scared out of you, first of all. First time I got shot at was, hey, this isn't a game. This is for real. This guy really missed me and he killed somebody else, but tomorrow he'll try to kill me. As we say in the military, that opens your nostrils.
With British casualties escalating, Churchill is quickly promoted and discovers he has what it takes to lead men into battle. For a man of Churchill's ambition, it's the first step towards redemption.
In his heart, what Churchill always wanted to be was the great warrior, the great hero. Here he was, a mere 800 men, whereas he dreamed of directing the battle destinies of millions.
The fighting seems unending.
Well.
Until Germany unleashes a deadly weapon.
Incoming! Gas! Move! Run away! Go! Go, 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 go! Get alive!
In total secrecy, Germany develops a massive arsenal of deadly chemical weapons. They quickly begin bombarding the Canadians and the rest of the Allies with deadly gases, like chlorine and phosgene. Tens of thousands of soldiers brutally suffocate in the trenches.
It was a means of terror, and it was a horrible death. It was the perfect illustration of this massive death that was the characteristic of the First World War.
With chemical weapons in its arsenal, it looks like a certain victory for Germany. England and France are growing desperate for a way to alter the course of the war. So they look to the one country that could finally help tip the scales in their favor: the United States. Until now, President Woodrow Wilson has kept America out of the war.
Wilson recognized that the American people did not want to get involved in a war, particularly if it's a war far away involving people and for causes that we had nothing to do with. Frankly, the American people did not see themselves at immediate risk.
But with hostilities escalating, a peaceful solution seems less and less likely. And Wilson's advisors urge him to begin preparing military forces. Among them is the 35-year-old Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Mr. President, I recommend an immediate allocation of more funds to our naval resources if we want to maintain military preparedness.
Wilson found himself being drawn closer and closer to war. In the spring of 1915, the British liner the Lusitania was sunk, and on board were over 100 Americans. Now, this was a big deal. Until this time, it had been a European war, but now in this European war, Americans were getting killed.
American resentment grows against Germany. And on the 26th of February 1917, it finally reaches a boiling point.
Mr. President, I think you should look at this right away.
Great Britain intercepts a secret telegram from Germany, intended for the Mexican government, containing a shocking proposal. The Germans are offering to fund a Mexican invasion of the United States that would allow the country to reclaim the border states of Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas.
The German ploy was preoccupy America with the war with Mexico, and therefore you keep them out of Europe. Well, this incensed a lot of Americans, and rightfully so.
The US government releases the contents of the secret message, and almost instantly, anti-German protests erupt all across America.
The Zimmerman telegram was one of the stupidest things the German government ever did. Texas didn't care about the war in Europe. Now, all of a sudden, the Germans are trying to return Texas to Mexico? Enough with Germany. They need to be taught a lesson.
President Wilson signs the declaration of war in April of 1917. Germany's plan to keep America out of Europe completely backfires. The Americans may finally be ready for war, but their military isn't. The US has a standing army of only 100,000 men, while the German army has 4.5 million. The United States hurries to build up its military, and those few with fighting experience are rushed to France, where some will be trained by a promising young captain. George S. Patton has been presented with a huge challenge: to command a battalion of American men, using the latest form of military innovation. The tank.
Some American generals were really resisting the tank because they didn't want to get rid of the horse cavalry. George Patton understood the power of the new technology of mobile and armored warfare, and he invested a lot in that.
The tank is already being used on the Western Front, with some success. But it runs out of fuel quickly, gets stuck in the mud easily, and its sheer size makes it difficult to incorporate in military maneuvers. But where others see an insurmountable challenge, Patton sees a chance to prove that his tanks can break the stalemate and turn the tide of the war in the Allies' favor.
I think innovation comes between the ears. It's not about the gizmo. It's about how you think about using technology and so forth. You have to give credit to people like Patton that experienced World War I, that had been thinking about how to employ new things.
Patton knows the stakes are high. But with his battalion of tanks, he's determined to win the war, or die trying. Meanwhile, as America prepares for war, Germany devises a plan to eliminate the Eastern Front and remove Russia from the war. 3 days after the Americans join the war, the Germans load a secret weapon onto a heavily guarded train, headed for Russia. It's a weapon that promises to destroy their enemies from the inside out. That weapon is Vladimir Lenin. Lenin is the leader of Russia's communist revolutionaries. With mass desertions on the Eastern Front and civil unrest at home, Lenin thinks they can finally topple the Russian government. For the past 10 years, he's been in exile in Switzerland until Germany sends him home on a train, along with over $10 million to fund his revolution.
The Germans decided that they would take this enormous gamble and bring Lenin back to Russia to bring about a revolution to get Russia out of the war. That's about as radical a step as you can take.
When Lenin gets to Moscow, he's greeted by one of his fellow revolutionaries. 6 times he's been exiled to Siberia, and 6 times he's escaped. His name is Joseph Stalin.
Comrades.
Comrades.
Let me show you to your own place.
Reunited, Stalin supports Lenin as he plots an armed rebellion playing right into Germany's hands. Over the next few months, Lenin and Stalin recruit a massive workers' militia. And using the $10 million from the German government, they quietly amass a stockpile of weapons until they're ready to make their move.
I have arranged to take the train stations and the telephone communications.
And the palace guard.
Many of our sources say they are sympathetic to our cause.
Our timing has to be perfect.
On the 7th of November 1917, communists storm the Winter Palace, toppling the Russian government and paving the way for the Soviet Union.
This is just the beginning, Comrade.
Just days later, Lenin signs a decree that takes Russia out of the war. The German plan works, bringing them one step closer to victory.